So coming up this weekend is going to be one of the better cards of the year, in my opinion. It's Alexander Volkanovski taking on Diego Lopes in the main event in Miami, with, of course, Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett in the co-main event. That is a pretty good set of fights, and I think that we also have a pretty good supporting preliminary card as well for this event in front of a crowd. We got out of the shipping container, which is where the last card took place, of course, between Murphy and Emmett. I went 9-3 on picks. We won picks, especially Angelo did quite well on that one. The safety parlay one, the lock of the week one, Diane Barbosa inside the distance one, which I had money on, but unfortunately for myself, I was overexposed on Luis Garule. I made a bit of a rookie error in that situation, unfortunately, but I did manage to profit so much on the PFL, which was quite good. Speaking on the PFL, PFL number 2 takes place this Friday, I believe, and I will be breaking down the card on my channel and on We Want Picks as well. So if you want to check out the PFL this year, I do recommend that you do it, because they've got an 8-man single elimination tournament. It's just going to be a much better format than what they've done in the past, so I look forward to breaking that down. And of course, we do have the We Want Picks website. Angelo talks about it for half an hour every single video, so I'm sure you probably know what is on that website, but it is Bet Sam's Bets, Angelo's Bets, Jacob's Bets, a lot of stuff to help you make your own bets, and my articles as well, which I am going to be doing for LFA and also PFL this weekend, and anything else that's pretty major on the regional scene. I think that's it. I think that's the intro. Poster review. This is a good poster. This is a very good poster, actually. It's one of the better ones. I think the more you look at it, the more you realize how much detail there is. They've got the names kind of in behind and in front of the art. I think it looks pretty cool. The lava effect is pretty cool. It just kind of looks like they actually put effort into this one, unlike the Murphy versus Emmett poster, which was just so lazy. Just so lazy. I think this is a good one. I quite like this one, to be honest with you. Yeah, it just looks like someone actually cared about what they were doing, and I think it just kind of come out with a pretty good product, I think. Now, also, of course, if you sign up using my code ARTEM, you do support my channel, and you also get 10% off your first month of membership, or if you want it to go longer, year of membership. You know what I mean? Let's go. Nora Cornolle versus Hailey Cowan. I think Cornolle wins this one. I'm actually quite confident in Nora Cornolle. I think that there is going to be a pretty significant striking difference between the two here. Yes, Cornolle's takedown defense could be a little bit suspect, but I actually think that she has proven, despite not really against the best wrestlers, to have good takedown defense. Now, the numbers could be a little bit wrong, but I do believe she defended both of Melissa Mullins' takedowns attempts, and Melissa Mullins is a pretty good, wrestler. And I know that she didn't defend takedowns against Jocelyn Edwards very well, like, at all. We have seen a little bit of an increase in that takedown defense in her most recent fights. I think that this matchup against Cowan, if Cornolle can defend the takedowns, I don't think it's going to be too close on the feet. Cowan hasn't fought for 2 years now. There is a reason for that, I think. If it is to do with the situation with her husband, which there has been a couple of articles out on. I'm not too sure if there was a final verdict on that situation, but if you don't know, you're definitely better off not knowing. I think your life will be a lot happier without it, and if you do know, then you know. Let's go. Cornolle by decision is the pick. We'll just quickly move on from that very terrible situation. Tresean Gore versus Marco Tulio at middleweight. I think it's going to be a banger. I'm picking Marco Tulio. I do think that Marco Tulio was like the smart pick to make here. However, genuinely, this is actually like the kind of fight that I feel like Tresean Gore doesn't have a bad chance at winning, because Marco Tulio, I think he's very reckless on the feet. In fact, I think he's a little bit too reckless on the feet, especially in his most recent 2 fights. Like, you can tell he's just looking for highlight reel knockouts, and he just leaves himself so overexposed to get caught. And I don't really like seeing that, especially when you do go against a guy like Tresean Gore, who I have been pretty low on in the past, and I still don't rate him super highly. I think a lot of people do think that he is a lot better than what he's proven to be, but Gore genuinely has a chance to catch Tulio here. And the thing about Tulio is he will wrestle, and Gore has shown that he can punish you for weak takedown entries with a very powerful guillotine, which he absolutely smoked Josh Fremd with, and then also caught Tricolli in as well. I do just think, though, Tulio, if he mixes in the striking with the wrestling, I think he's going to find success here, and I am still going to once again side with the Tulio submission. It hasn't cashed in his last 2 fights, but Tulio is a good grappler for middleweight. For some reason, he doesn't really like showcasing it, but I think against Tresean Gore, it would be a very smart decision for him to do so. So I am going to be picking Tulio to win this one by submission, probably in a later round as well. But I think that Gore genuinely has a shot at winning this fight, and I think he is going to have some moments. So I'm not super confident in Tulio, but I do think he's going to find a finish later on in the fight, round 2 or 3. Now we have Sumudaerji taking on Mitch Raposo. This is actually a pretty tough one to predict, and I actually think that the line should be a little bit closer than it is. And yes, I am very well aware that Sumudaerji has been a ranked flyweight in the past, but the thing is, he got ranked by beating Zaruk Adashev, Malcolm Gordon, and Andrei Sukumtar. 3 guys that are not in the UFC anymore, and 3 guys that really didn't find much success in the promotion. I mean, like, Malcolm Gordon had a, I guess, potentially underrated run because he did have a pretty close fight against Mohamed Makayev, but you guys know what I mean. He didn't really beat the best guys to get here in this situation. And the problem as well with Sumudaerji is throughout his career, he hasn't really shown the best takedown defense, which is going to be very important against Mitch Raposo, because Raposo is a wrestler and is pretty much only a wrestler. Because against Tim Elliott, I think Tim Elliott only took him down once, but absolutely dominated him once he got that situation there. Matt Schnell, of course, ended up taking him down, but that was an absolute war, one of the better fights of 2022. One of the better fights probably of the last 5 years. I think I could probably put that out there potentially. But against Charles Johnson was only able to take him down twice out of 6 attempts. I believe that's the number. I could be wrong. But Sumudaerji did show promise in the takedown defense department in that fight against Charles Johnson, which I do like to see, because this is going to be the wrestler versus striker matchup. Sumudaerji is a very talented striker, very dynamic for the weight class, quite tall for the weight class, and he uses the length quite well. Raposo, I think, is going to be at a striking disadvantage here. Raposo is a very talented wrestler, but he really is only a wrestler, and I think that against the striker, you've just got to pick, do you think Sumudaerji defends the takedowns? Because if you don't think he defends the takedowns, then you should probably be going with Raposo. However, I think just kind of based on what I'll see from Charles Johnson, who I think can set up his takedown entries a little bit better than Raposo, because Charles Johnson also has that striking threat on the feet. I like Sumudaerji to defend takedowns against Raposo, and I think that he is going to be the much better striker in this matchup. So I'm going to go with Sumudaerji to win this fight by decision. As you can see, the Tapology voters also do believe that the fight is a bit closer than that too. Now we have Sedriques Dumas fighting against Michal Oleksiejczuk. Michal Oleksiejczuk is on a pretty bad losing streak right now, but if you actually really look into his career, it's because he's just been fighting literally anyone the UFC has offered him. You know, he did have that fight against Kevin Holland. I believe this was a short notice matchup as well, because he fought him very soon after he lost to Mikel Pereira. And although he did get, I believe it was his arm broken there in that situation, but it must not have been. Anyway, the referee thought he broke his arm because he fought Sharo Magomedov like 2 months later. He dropped Kevin Holland in that matchup. He didn't look too bad in that matchup. He lost to Caio Borralho. Borralho's a good fighter. Mikel Pereira's proved to be a pretty good fighter, although he did kind of lose that main event quite dominantly. And then he put up a good fight against Sharaputdin Magomedov. What I'm trying to say is that 3-fight losing streak, I think that you can put asterisks on that because they were all like close fights together. He only fought 2 months in between all of these matchups, and they were all tough guys. Now he's taking time away. He's taken a big step down in competition, in my opinion, now against Sedriques Dumas. And Sedriques Dumas is a pretty technical striker. However, he can be a little bit low volume and he can get backed up. And I just don't think that that's going to work against Michal Oleksiejczuk, who statistically is a very high volume striker for middleweight, and statistically has pretty decent striking defense himself. I think that Michal Oleksiejczuk is going to come out here against Sedriques Dumas and just really put the pressure on and just kind of march Dumas down and just throw the volume through the hands. I think eventually he is going to land something. This is a boxer versus kickboxer matchup. You know, Michal Oleksiejczuk isn't going to throw kicks. He's just going to come forward and throw hands. And I think that that's going to work out in his favor. I think Michal's going to close the distance and he's going to land the better shots up and close against Dumas, who's going to try and make this a kickboxing matchup from range. Even though Dumas has actually been implementing a bit of wrestling recently, I don't think he's going to find too much success against Oleksiejczuk in that situation. So I think that Oleksiejczuk, I apologize, is going to find the KO with the boxing. Now it's Darren Elkins versus Julian Erosa. Darren Elkins out of nowhere has managed to go on a 2-fight win streak. However, I do think it does end here against Julian Erosa. This is two guys that are definitely at the end of their career right now. Julian Erosa, 36 years old, 41 professional fights. Darren Elkins, nearly 41 years old now, with 40 professional fights. This is going to be his 41st pro fight, and that is pretty crazy to really think about. However, the difference between these two, and I know that Julian Erosa has been knocked out a lot in his career, Darren Elkins has taken a lot of damage in his career overall, and I know that that is his nickname, but I mean, if you go through his career and you look at the matchup against Sumudaerji, where it was a big comeback win, he took a lot of damage in that fight, and then throughout his career, he kind of proceeded to take a lot of damage in that losing streak. I thought Jonathan Pierce landed quite a few pretty good shots up against him. I think that Julian Erosa is better than Darren Elkins in all aspects except for the wrestling. I think that when the fight is on the feet, Erosa's a pretty tricky technical striker, being 6'1" for this weight class, and I think that he can be the one that lands the more damaging shots on the feet. And if the fight does get down to the ground, Julian Erosa's on a 2-fight win streak right now by guillotine choke. Now, I don't like the idea of Erosa pulling guillotine against Darren Elkins, because Elkins does have very strong control once he does get on top, and I think Erosa giving up the position for the guillotine attempt would be a big mistake. But Erosa can punish you with defensive submissions if you do get a little bit lazy on top, and I think Erosa can work those submission attempts to get back up to the feet, where I think he's going to have a pretty sizable advantage here over Darren Elkins, who throughout his career, even when he was in his prime, and right now just hasn't really shown good takedown, good striking defense. And I think that Erosa can kind of just out-volume Elkins on the feet and win a decision in that way. So I'm going to go with Erosa to win a fight by decision against Elkins. Elkins is a tough guy, but I just don't think that he's going to have the striking defense required to kind of put up with Erosa, and I just don't really see him able to find that much wrestling success when Erosa's going to be dancing away in range. The next fight is a prelim between Chase Hooper and Jim Miller. The UFC are really trying to build Chase Hooper right now because he just fought and beat Clay Guida. And now they're going to give him Jim Miller. And I would say, honestly, at this point, pretty stylistically similar matchups between Jim Miller and Clay Guida. I would just say at this point, Jim Miller, out of the toe, I still am battling a cold. I'll have some water. Stylistically, between Jim Miller and Clay Guida, I would say that Jim Miller has still got a lot more left in the tank at this point. I think he has proven that. Yes, he just got absolutely demolished by Bobby Green, but after that, he just subs Damon Jackson in a round, and that's not bad. It was by guillotine again. There's so many guillotines on this card, but Damon Jackson isn't too bad. And he also knocked out Pat Sabatini, who just beat Joanderson Brito. So yeah, MMA just doesn't make sense, does it? But Chase Hooper, I can see what the UFC are doing right now. There is potential in Chase Hooper being a very popular fighter. I couldn't really see Chase Hooper being like a superstar for them, kind of like Sean O'Malley or something along those lines. But I can see what they're doing. They see the potential in Chase Hooper. He had a bad run. He lost to Steven Peterson. He lost to Steve Garcia. That was a really, really bad loss, but he was able to bounce back against Fior and Levitt. Couple of decent wins, knocked down Borchev somehow, just somehow managed to do that. And now he's fighting Jim Miller. Jim Miller's a pretty good striker though. Jim Miller's been fighting those knockouts recently. You know, he hurt and knocked out Jesse Butler in like 40 seconds. Hurt Gabriel Benitez on the feet and then ended up subbing him. But it's a grappler versus grappler matchup. I think between the two, honestly, Jim Miller, and this is going to sound like crazy disrespectful because he's got the most submissions in UFC history, alongside Charles Oliveira. I think right now I like Chase Hooper's grappling if the fight does go down to the ground. And Jim Miller, I know he's only been submitted 3 times in his UFC career. He is nearly 42 years old. He did take a lot of damage against Bobby Green. I know we didn't see the effects of that against Damon Jackson whatsoever, but I think we could maybe see the effects of that here against Chase Hooper. So I think it's going to be a grappling affair, but I've got to go with the guy that is 25 years old compared to the guy that is 42 years old. And once again, I don't mean to pick this to disrespect Jim Miller, but I am going to actually pick Chase Hooper to win by submission. I think that he's going to be the fourth man to submit the legendary Jim Miller. Now we have Virna Jandiroba fighting against Yan Xiaonan. Once again, striker versus grappler matchup. At this point, honestly, I can kind of tell that the UFC really don't want to give Virna Jandiroba the title shot, because she has now gone on a pretty impressive win streak in my opinion. Beating Amanda Lemos, beating Lupita Godinez, which is it's a decent win, right? But I would say at this point now, with the 4-fight win streak, she probably is deserving of that title shot, and the UFC just clearly don't want to give it to her, so that's interesting. And Zhang Weili also just a very inactive champion too, which just doesn't really make sense to me, because I do think she is the best fighter in this weight class by far. But I do digress there. Yan Xiaonan is a very talented striker, very good boxer for this weight class. She does pack a lot of power. I actually thought that she beat Marina Rodriguez when she lost that split decision. I thought she won the first 2 rounds. And then after that, of course, she did win a couple of fights with a big KO and then fought against the champion who I just mentioned, Zhang Weili, and she was out-wrestled in that matchup, but then she came back with a win over Ricci. This is a similar matchup to the Ricci fight. However, I do think that Virna Jandiroba is just a bit more like dominant in the control than Ricci. Ricci's very undersized for the division. Ricci also quite well known for kind of having that Mackenzie Dern sort of a takedown offense where she just struggles to get the takedown sometimes. Jandiroba doesn't really find that same issue, and she does control against the cage very well with her takedowns. I like Jandiroba to win this one. I think it's going to be a boring fight if Jandiroba wins, but I think it's a Jandiroba decision here. I think she's going to get the takedowns. She's going to land the ground and pound. Yes, Yan Xiaonan's takedown defense has been improving ever since she started training at Team Alpha Male, but from what we've seen from Jandiroba, I think that Jandiroba does get it done. And we move up to the featured prelim fight, which is pretty guaranteed to be a good matchup. It's between Dan Ige and Sean Woodson, but although I have tried to fade Sean Woodson in the past, Sean Woodson just does keep winning, doesn't he? He's on a very impressive win streak at this point after the very, very awkward matchup against Luis Saldana, where Saldana actually dropped him a couple of times, but then, just Woodson was able to out-grapple him in the second and third round was kind of the story of that fight. It was a very, very odd matchup. Very, very odd fight. We have seen Sean Woodson go on a pretty good win streak after that. He takes on Dan Ige, who, at this point, Dan Ige is good. That's the thing. Like, you cannot discredit Dan Ige's recent run, even though he has been losing a couple times. Like, he went out there and he hurt Lerone Murphy. Josh Emmett did manage to land some good shots on Murphy, but he never had Murphy as hurt as Dan Ige did at one point in that matchup there. I believe it was in the second round, of course. Against Diego Lopes, he took this fight on like a few hours' notice. And although he does remind you that he did this every single day, because he just does not stop tweeting about it, it is still pretty impressive that he did it. And he did put up a pretty good matchup against Lopes, because Lopes, I genuinely believe in moments Lopes striking was getting exposed by very short notice Dan Ige, who was landing some very good shots inside, while Lopes was just kind of swinging his very, very wild hooks that Lopes likes to do. But I think in this one here, it's a boxer versus boxer matchup. I do think we're going to get a striking matchup out of these two. And although Sean Woodson is just built like an absolute animal, 6'2", 145 pounds, very, very thin legs. Honestly, I don't know how he does it. He was a heavyweight at one point in boxing. But yeah, I think that Sean Woodson, I've got to pick him here. I think that he can pick apart Dan Ige from range. Yes, Dan Ige is a very good boxer, and yes, in the past I have said, if you're going to fight Dan Ige, you want to fight him against things that he's not so good at, because Dan Ige, the thing that Dan Ige is best at is boxing. That is what he's best at. However, I do think that Sean Woodson is going to be able to just kind of annoy Ige with the range that he's got here. He's got a big reach advantage, got a big height advantage. Woodson throws a lot of kicks as well, even though he's got those very little legs, and Ige doesn't really. I like Ige. Sorry, I like Woodson. I like Woodson. I'm picking Woodson by decision. And now we have the return of the king. Nikita Krylov is back against Dominick Reyes. My GOAT was meant to return last year. However, unfortunately, his opponent, Azamat Murzakanov, pulled out, and now I believe there was also another situation with Murzakanov. No, he's been rebooked for a little bit later on in the year, but I think there was something that went on in that situation that kind of made the fight not happen. But I was going to pick my king, my chief, Nikita Krylov, to beat Azamat Murzakanov, which is probably a foreshadowing. I'm going to pick him to beat Dominick Reyes here. However, very big red flags out there. Very big red flags out there, I am aware. He hasn't fought since the start of 2023. I can tell you that the reason for this is because he actually had surgery on his back at the start of 2024. And yes, that is very concerning. A surgery on the back is a pretty big deal. But he's taken a long period of time off. He was ready to go in November of 2024. So now he's going to have, another like 4-5 months off in that training time, that recovery time that he's going to have from that pretty major surgery that he did have. And then another thing as well that a lot of people are going to point out here is the first round of Volkanovski versus Nikita Krylov. And it was actually Bitsam himself that told me to watch this one, because yes, my king Krylov, he does get caught a lot by Oezdemir in the first round. But you got to remember, Oezdemir is dangerous in the first round, man. Like, I think that Oezdemir is a very, very underrated fighter. And I think that his run in 2017, when I was a very young boy now, this is 8 years ago, was quite legendary. Anyway, I think that Krylov wins this fight for the well-roundedness. I think that's what it comes down to. Yes, Dominick Reyes is now back on his win streak. Yes, I'm pretty happy for him because it was looking quite dire at one point. But Nikita Krylov isn't Anthony Smith, man. He just isn't. And I just don't see Nikita Krylov going out there and just getting absolutely sparked by Dominick Reyes in the first or the second round. I think that Krylov on the feet can make it pretty competitive, but the differences between the two is Krylov can mix in the wrestling and the grappling too. I do genuinely like Krylov's well-rounded skill set to go out there and defeat Dominick Reyes in this matchup. I think that Krylov can find some moments on the feet. Reyes is very athletic. He is very dynamic. He is more athletic and more dynamic than Krylov, and he's more powerful than Krylov. I'll admit that for sure. But I just like the fact that Krylov can get the takedowns. Krylov can shoot for takedowns. Do I think that Krylov should be a minus 200 favorite in this matchup, though? No, he hasn't fought since 2023. He's coming off a back surgery. There's definitely a lot kind of going on here. I won't be betting on Krylov, even though I do really like Krylov. If you can't tell, I am a big fan of him. I think he puts up some of the most fun fights in the promotion, and this shouldn't be much different. But I like Krylov to mix in it all with the wrestling and the grappling. I'm picking Krylov to win. Now we move up to Yair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. I like Rodriguez in this matchup because I think that genuinely when this fight was made between Pitbull and Yair, I thought to myself, oh well, this is the worst stylistic matchup they could have possibly given Patricio Pitbull for his UFC debut in the top 10. And yes, Patricio Pitbull's very deserving of a matchup with someone as ranked as highly as Yair Rodriguez. He has won the title at bantamweight and featherweight at Bellator, and then he also tried to get the title at... No, sorry, I digress. He won the title at featherweight and lightweight at Bellator, and then he tried to capture the title at bantamweight in Bellator, but he wasn't able to do that. But that is still someone that went for a title in 3 different weight classes. There's not many other people that have tried to do that. Saladin Parnasse tried to do it in KSW with the featherweight, the lightweight, and the welterweight title. He failed to capture the welterweight title. Patricio Pitbull did it the opposite way. He tried to go down to 135, which honestly could have been a move that I wouldn't have minded seeing him do a lot earlier on in his career, because he is small for this weight class and he was very small for 155, standing at 5'6". But what he does so well is he likes to pressure forward. He likes to throw a lot of hands. He boxes a lot. He does shoot for takedowns on occasion, but it's definitely not really a big part of Patricio Pitbull's game. And the thing about Yair Rodriguez that I do think is just going to be such a difficult matchup for Pitbull is Yair manages the range so well. He does throw his kicks from range very well. He's going to have a significant reach advantage, obviously, with the hands as well, which I like. He throws a lot of straight shots. And I think he can defend the takedowns of Patricio Pitbull if they even come, because Pitbull doesn't really wrestle all that much. Pitbull really is a pretty opportunistic grappler, I would say. He likes to box for the most part, but if the opportunity comes, he'll go for a takedown, or if he's getting hurt on the feet, he'll go for a takedown, or if he hurts his opponent, he'll go for a takedown, sort of that sort of situation there. And I think that Yair isn't going to give him that opportunity. I think that Yair is going to have much better movement now at this point than a 38-year-old Pitbull. And I think that Yair is just going to pick him apart from range. Pitbull's a tough guy. This is a guy that's taken some big shots from Michael Chandler at 155 pounds. And we know how hard Michael Chandler hits. But I think that just stylistically, genuinely, I think that Yair can maintain the range here against Pitbull, use that very significant size advantage that he's going to have over him, and just kind of look pretty good. The thing about Pitbull, though, is Pitbull is good enough to go out there and beat a lot of guys in the top 15. Although he is nearly 38 years old, he has beaten some of the best fighters in the world at Bellator. I know a lot of people seem to kind of discredit Bellator, but genuinely this run that he went on, this absolute domination of Adam Borix is very impressive. He took the O of AJ McKee. Even Kleber Quick, although he's very one-dimensional, was on a pretty decent win streak before he got stopped by Patricio Pitbull. I think a lot of people aren't going to know who Pitbull is, which is a little bit of a shame in my opinion, because, I mean, the guys that he has beaten, Daniel Weichel has 60 professional fights right now. You can go back all the way back and you can look at a lot of pretty big names that he was able to defeat. But I think that, Pitbull, I think that he's going to find success in the UFC. He wants to retire in the UFC. I'm very happy they signed him. I wouldn't mind if they signed his brother, Patricky. I know his brother's not quite as good as Patricio, but Patricky puts up fun fights, man. And if you want to have fun fights, Patricio Pitbull's your guy. I think Patricio's going to have fun fights as well, but I've got to go with Yair. I just think as soon as this matchup was made, my gut feeling was, oh well, this is truly the worst matchup they could have given Pitbull. So, although I'll be rooting for Pitbull, especially now that he's at the end of his career, he's made that obvious. And also, if Pitbull wins this matchup and then Volkanovski loses this matchup, Volk versus Pitbull would be a perfect fight for a 5-round co-main event of a massive pay-per-view, or something like that. But yeah, I like Rodriguez. I like Yair to win the fight against Patricio. Now we have Bryce Mitchell taking on Gene Silva. I'll be honest, guys, I'm not really a big fan of Bryce Mitchell. But also, I've been quite honest in my opinion of Gene Silva in the past as well. I have not been super high on him throughout his run, and it really was only until he beat Jordan Mdoba. Well, it wasn't even the win over Jordan. The win over Jordan wasn't actually that impressive. It was the win over Doba that really got me interested in him. So he beat Kevin Vallejos in a fight which I think is a lot closer than I think a lot of people remember or even know about, because Vallejos actually won the first round against Silva and was winning the second round until Silva landed a big shot and started to take over from there on out. And then the rest is history. We know what happens throughout the rest. Big performance over Judoba, big performance over Malsic. But here's the thing about Gene Silva. A little bit of a frustrating performance against Malsic Baghdasaryan. And this is where I think a lot of people might disagree with me, because I don't really know how else to say it. Silva, although that's his brand, Silva doesn't like to stand and bang. Silva was retreating a lot against Vallejos, who was trying to stand and bang with him, and it was standing and banging with him. I'm not going to say that too many more times. He will, and also against Malsic, that's the thing about Malsic, is he wasn't really throwing anything. He was just kind of letting Malsic throw his kicks, throw his punches, and Silva would throw a counter, or he would do his handshake, and and then eventually, it was almost this is genuinely what it was like. It was almost like Gene Silva just decided that he was going to knock out Malsic at this point. That's kind of what happened. All of a sudden, Silva exploded for the first time in the fight and knocked out Malsic Baghdasaryan. I think that if Gene Silva goes out there and he puts the volume, he puts the pace on Bryce Mitchell, he goes out there pretty aggressive whereas Dan Ige did it, I think you'd knock out Bryce Mitchell in the first round 9 out of 10 times. However, the problem is, Bryce Mitchell on the feet his offense isn't too bad. And if Gene Silva just kind of watch Bryce Mitchell get off his offense, get off and get started, the takedowns for Bryce Mitchell will come eventually. So Gene Silva needs to throw the volume. He needs to be aggressive in this matchup. And I think he's going to be honest, I do. Because if you watch the Bryce Mitchell versus Josh Emmett fight, Bryce Mitchell closes the distance against Josh Emmett with his chin up in the air like this photo. I'm not even kidding. I genuinely encourage you to watch it back. Mitchell enters the pocket with his chin up in the air. He was begging to get knocked out in that fight, and that's exactly what happened. He did bounce back against Kron Gracie, but come on, man. Gene Silva's takedown defense as well, very suspect, I know, because Charles Jourdain was able to take him down. And also in that fight as well, I should notice this, Jacob Lyons was tweeting this on Twitter. Gene Silva pulled guillotine. He pulled guillotine against oh god, sorry guys, my brain isn't working because I've got a cold. He pulled guillotine against Charles Jourdain, and you can't do that against Mitchell. Mitchell's wrestling isn't incredible, but it's the grappling of Mitchell that is incredible. And yes, he was holding his own against Ilia Topuria in moments there, who I think genuinely is a very good grappler himself. I've said for a long time, I think Ilia Topuria's grappling is better than his striking. He just strikes for the most part. So be interesting to see how this goes, but I'm picking Gene Silva. I'm picking Gene Silva by KO. I actually have tailed the slam of the week. Shout out to BetSam. Me and BetSam as well are going to be doing a live stream this week. I forgot to mention that in the intro. I don't know when, but we're going to be doing it on his channel probably. So yeah, shout out to BetSam. I'm picking Silva KO though. I do think Silva knocks him out. Is there an argument for Bryce Mitchell to win the fight? Yes, I do think that there is, but like, if I really think about it, I think that as long as the fight is on the feet, and I know I said this about the Pat Sabatini versus Joanderson Brito matchup, but we can blame Joanderson Brito a lot for his very bad decision making in that fight. I think as long as the fight's on the feet, Gene Silva is going to be live to knock him out. So I'm going to pick Silva in this matchup. I'm picking Silva by KO. And this is where my picks start to get very contrarian, I think a lot of people will kind of say. Because I'm not picking Paddy Pimblett in this fight, and I know, I've picked against Paddy Pimblett so many times in the past. When will I learn my lesson? Maybe never. I'll be honest. However, you need to hear me out on this one here. Paddy Pimblett does not statistically have a good takedown offense rate. Michael Chandler statistically does have a good takedown defense rate. Michael Chandler's got a big time wrestling background, and my take on this fight, like my view on this fight, is the same as the Sumudaerji versus Mitch Raposo fight, except like obviously on a much more grand scale that this fight is. If Paddy Pimblett can get the takedowns, he's going to win the fight. He just will. We saw Michael Chandler get taken down and controlled in moments by Charles Oliveira. We've seen Michael Chandler get taken down and controlled in moments against other opponents in the past. I'm going to have to go through Tapology for a second here. Dustin Poirier was able to do it, of course. And the difference, though, between these two matchups is Michael Chandler was grabbing the cage to defend the takedowns, and he was cheating. He was cheating a lot. And if he's going to cheat against Paddy Pimblett, I think it's going to be in Michael Chandler's favor. Obviously, because I think that Chandler's real true way to win this matchup is by KO. And I do believe out of these two, that although Michael Chandler is an idiot and probably has some of the worst fight IQ in UFC history, in this particular matchup, that is actually going to be very good for him. Because Paddy Pimblett, as I said, statistically doesn't have a very good takedown offense rate. He also doesn't have very good cardio, which we saw in the matchup against Tony Ferguson, because in the third round, Tony Ferguson was really starting to put it on Paddy Pimblett, if you can remember that. I truly believe that if Michael Chandler defends the takedowns, he's going to knock out Paddy Pimblett. And that's what I'm picking. I'm picking Michael Chandler by KO. I don't know if there's really much more to the breakdown than that. That's just how I perceive the fight. I think that this fight is going to be a striking matchup, and I think the more powerful striker, I think the better striker out of the two is Michael Chandler. And I do believe that as long as the fight is on the feet, Chandler's going to be live to get a KO. He hurt Charles Oliveira on the feet. Paddy Pimblett, of course, notoriously doesn't have good striking defense. We all know this. That's not going to help when you're fighting Michael Chandler. So, although a lot of people are on Pimblett, I know Angelo from We Want Picks is very confident in Paddy Pimblett. I don't see it, man. I really don't. I genuinely see a Michael Chandler knockout in this fight, which is why I'm going to be picking him. And here we go to another potentially contrarian pick. I'm genuinely picking these fights because this is how I see the fights going. Everyone's on Diego Lopes. I am picking Alexander Volkanovski in this fight. I've actually been thinking about this fight for weeks. For a very long time, I've been looking at this one because my first initial reaction when this fight was announced was, oh no, Alexander Volkanovski is going to get knocked out again. But I've really looked into this fight. And I've been thinking for so long. I've been talking with this one with Bet Sam, who was picking Diego Lopes. I've been talking about this one with other guys, of course, if you're in the Discord. The better fighter out of the two is Alexander Volkanovski. And I don't believe that you can really dispute that. And from what I've seen from Diego Lopes in the past, I think Volk's gonna have his moments, man. But the problem is as well, I think this is a big factor as well, that we just don't know this right now. Like, how washed is Volkanovski? Because yes, he got KO'd by Islam Makhachev, bad KO, and then he went out there and defended his belt only 4 months later against Ilia Topuria. And yes, he got knocked out in that matchup as well. But he was looking really good on the feet against Ilia Topuria. He won the first round against Ilia Topuria. He was looking pretty good, but then a big lapse in judgment, and Ilia Topuria was able to rush him, was able to throw a bit of a combination. He eventually landed that right hook in the combination, and it was over for Volkanovski. But I don't think that these last two losses can really define how good he is. Like, yes, it was just a one-shot big-time KO against Makhachev on short notice. That sucks. It happened. Against Ilia Topuria, once again, somewhat short notice matchup as well. Was looking good, got caught by the more powerful striker, and Topuria went on to knock out Max Holloway. So, I don't think you can take too much from that. And Diego Lopes, as I said, when he fought Dan Ige stepped up in this matchup on 7 hours notice, I believe it was. Dan Ige, truly, and I mean that when I say this, showed that Diego Lopes striking maybe isn't all that. He got those massive KOs against Yusuf, against Sabatini. These were like, Sabatini was getting up from a takedown attempt. Yusuf, this was in the clinch with an uppercut in the clinch. Ige was closing the distance against him, was boxing up Diego Lopes in moments. And Diego Lopes striking really is kind of Paddy Pimblett-esque, where his chin can get up in the air sometimes. And he does just throw these very, very wild strikes. And that really is the majority of what Diego Lopes is trying to do. Diego Lopes is trying to take your head off out there when you're on the feet with him. And I think that, yes, you can definitely try and pick Diego Lopes to land one of those strikes. But I think that Volkanovski, as I said, has proven to have pretty solid striking defense in the past. Yes, he got caught by Ilia Topuria, but he looked good in the first round. He was looking good in the second round. Ilia Topuria eventually landed the big shot. Volkanovski won three fights against Max Holloway. I believe he won 12 out of the 15 rounds, is what a lot of people believe in that matchup, in that rivalry. Volkanovski, Max Holloway is a good striker too. I think he's a better striker than Lopes. I think that as long as Volkanovski can make Lopes miss, I think it's going to be very good for Volk, and I think eventually Volk can kind of start taking over with his boxing. I think eventually Volkanovski could maybe get some takedowns. However, I think it would be a mistake to shoot for takedowns early, because Lopes is a very, very good grappler. Like, he's very good at grappling. The submission attempts that this guy throws up is very impressive. Of course, took on Movsar Evloev on 5 days' notice. Was able to get Movsar Evloev in some leg locks. I believe it was 2 leg locks he had Evloev in, and an armbar that he had Evloev in. And he hurt Evloev on the feet as well. How did he not get a performance bonus for this win over Yusuf? Justice for Lopes. Wait, what? He didn't get a performance bonus for this. Anyways, Volkanovski, I'm picking Volk. I think he's the better fighter out of the two. The odds reflect that. I actually think that the odds should be closer. Minus 150, this should be dead even, I believe, because it really is a dead even 50-50 chance of Volkanovski outlasting Lopes's absolute barrage of strikes, and just kind of winning the rounds, winning the minutes, and Lopes just trying to find that one shot, which is going to potentially land. A lot of people are picking Lopes to land that shot. I'm not. I think Volkanovski can. I think oh God, it just depends. That's the thing. This breakdown could mean nothing if Volkanovski's washed. That's it. Because Volkanovski's admitted to obviously having some personal problems, with his own mental health and stuff, and I know that's obviously personal stuff to him too. But like that's obviously not a good thing, really, when you're trying to fight someone that's gonna like genuinely just try and knock you out. But I think Volk's got this. I'm picking Volk. I'm picking Volk by decision. 67% of Tapology voters are on Volk. That's a surprise to me. I thought that a lot more were, because the We Want Picks team quite like Lopes in this matchup, but not me. I'm picking Volk. I think Volk gets it done. I think he's the better fighter out of the two. I'm gonna stand on that. I've been thinking about this for so long. That's my final prediction. I'm gonna lock that in. Let's go Volk. Surely he can do it. And that's it. That's my breakdown. 40 minutes. That's an Angelo level breakdown right there. Hopefully it wasn't too torturous to listen to, because as I said, I do have a cold. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll be doing PFL later this week as well. So I'll see you guys then.